So tonight, my guest is Samuel Abu Jinapor. I have to always be careful because it's confusing. John Abdullahi and Samuel Abu. And then there's also a Professor Jinapor we interviewed recently. Is he the oldest, the prof?
Yeah, he's the oldest.
Okay. So he's an academic purely?
More or less.
So who does he vote for, you or your brother?
You have to ask him.
So you are the third?
I'm the fourth.
Is there another boy?
There's a lady between John and I.
Oh, okay. So, but the prof is the boss?
He's the boss.
So even though you may be his minister, he's your big brother?
Absolutely.
I need
doubt about
the
that.
person I really want to interview is your father, to ask him how he did it. Did you guys grow up in a political family?
No, not at all.
Not at all?
Not at all.
So how did the two of you end up in different parties?
Well, I believe by coincidence. We had very checkered political evolution, you know, from student activism, student politics.
Okay.
And one event after the other meant that I ended up in the MPP and John ended up in the NDC. That's really what it is.
But you went to KNUST?
Yes, I did.
And studied physics?
Yes,
that's so is that when you became political or before that?
Well, I think, I mean, even in secondary school, I was politically awake and politically conscious. Okay. Yes, I was in the secondary school at the time of the 2000 elections.
Okay.
And I was very much interested.
Which secondary school is this?
St. Charles Minor Seminary.
Okay.
In northern region, in Tamale specifically. And I was very interested. I was very interested in the politics of the time. But I think I became a lot more formed politically in KNUST.
Wow. Your rise in politics has been quite fascinating because for somebody who watched the 2000 elections as a secondary school student, and in 20 years, actually, like in 17 years, you became deputy chief of staff because Akufo-Addo made you his chief of staff deputy in 2018?
2017.
So that's 17 years after secondary school.
Yeah.
So you haven't even factored in university.
Yeah.
That's a serious rise. And then 22 years later, Minister for Lands.
Yes. So I had the privilege of being named Deputy Chief of Staff at the age of 33.
Wow.
You may be aware. And Minister at the age of 37. So, yes.
And you were the president's spokesperson even when he was a candidate at some point.
That is correct.
That's incredible.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's how many politicians rise this quickly in their political trajectory.
But I'm here. I'm now the other side of the political equation. That's how it goes.
No, but it's not about being in government. It's about, but you're a duty bearer. You're a member of parliament for Damango. And that's very important. You are the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and one of the lead voices on the MPP side. One of the most, at least on the MPP side. So even if you're not in government, you are still a serious politician.
Yes, I am, of course. But I'm just saying that, look, my attitude has always been that whatever comes your way, you try and do it well. And my father always advised us that if you were asked to sweep, you should sweep so well that when you're talking about people who sweep, you'll be named.
Of course.
So whatever you are given to do, you try and do it to the best of your ability. Did you do well or not? Did you excel? You cannot tell. The jury will be out there.
The question I usually ask politicians when they come on this show this year is, my opening question is always the election question. So how did you see the election for somebody who was a key member of the previous government? How shocked were you at the outcome?
The election night of December 7 was a very long night. You know, you go into elections in 2008, was a very difficult election. We couldn't win. In 2012, we did not win. 2016, we won. It's very sweet. The difference between winning and losing is like day and night.
Yeah.
And in 2020, we won. And 2024, we did not win. And so that was a very difficult moment, long night, difficult night, and so on. But really, I think the real issue about 2024 was the unexpected nature of the results. And I must be honest, if anybody had told me before the election that we will come out with that kind of results, I will doubt it completely. But there it is, and as they say, the voice of the people is the voice of God, and the people have spoken and spoken very loudly, and we take it in our stride.
Politicians usually tell us in the media that they know what the people think, but for even you, I'm sure the election result proved to you that there's a lot more to understand about how Ghanaians think.
Well, on the contrary, I think that politicians are rather in the worst position to tell what the people think. I mean, of course, as a serious political operator and political party, you definitely must have tools which will reasonably and objectively tell you what is happening in the political market or in the political space, and tools like research, opinion polls, and so on. But all of those also sometimes fail you. But as an individual and as a political grouping, I believe that people will tell persons or individuals or groups who are not political the honest truth than they would tell you who is in a position of authority or who is a political being. You know, in my own constituency, for example, there are 2 or 3 people I normally will go to and get a sounding from them. If you have a good pastor who has a wide reach, the congregants of that pastor will most likely confide in him more than they will confide in you, the member of parliament. So that may be a good source. But I still have to conclude by saying that there are time-tested tools which are available to politicians and political parties to be able to determine the mood of a country or a constituency. They also do fail. But you are right. People normally will come and speak to you more honestly than they will come and speak to me. They will tell me what probably I want to hear.
I'll come back to MPP, but I just wanted to start off on this note. President Mahama has been in office for 93, 94 days now. Is that enough time to assess a candidate based on your experience? Or is it a 120 days, or is it first year? What is an objective time to say this person is doing this or that as a president?
93 days, 120 days, even 6 months will not be enough time to conclusively assess a president. I think the pundits have more or less come to the conclusion that midterm is somehow a real time to be able to pass a largely conclusive judgment or determination as to how the government is doing, which is why, for example, in America, the midterm elections tends to be very consequential. And also, a lot of the experts will say to you that political parties lose elections by midterm. And the country is either taking you in or the country is writing you off. But the very beginning of a government, the composition of the government itself, the appointment of key officers of the government, the reading of the first budget, the various initial interventions or decisions or policies which are announced or rolled out, can give you a sense of the trajectory of the government and the momentum, whether or not the momentum is with them or whether or not they are headed in a direction where they will end up well. It can give you snipers of it. But I'm not too sure that 93 days is enough time to say this government is doing well or this government is not doing well, or this government is headed for failure, or this government is headed for sources.
And I think we saw a report Musa Danquah did where the president's approval ratings were pretty high. People felt that the country was moving in the right direction. And of course, this is 2 months into an administration. So that is to be expected. The question though is it more what happens within the politics of parliament that determines the public view, or it's more substantive?
Well, you know, I think the reference of Musa Danquah's report is good, but you also know that the research he did in February and the research he just released, the approval rating is dropped by some 12 percentage points or so. In February it was 70% plus. Now I think it's 60% plus. 60% plus is still a high enough approval rating if this report is what we are going by. But I think it's important to point out that there is a dip in the approval rating, as is expected, and as it will continue to dip normally. That means it's normal. Once you govern and take decisions, you will have people who will not be particularly excited about some of the decisions taken. For example, the jack-up of electricity at Harris, for example, is not one that I believe a lot of Ghanaians will particularly be happy about. So you will have a series of events which will bring down your approval ratings. But that said, my view is Parliament alone is not enough. I think Parliament is crucial. Parliament is absolutely important when it comes to the politics of our country and shaping public opinion, because as you know, Parliament is essentially a microcosm of the country. You have every constituency represented there. And that obviously is a melting pot of the politics of our country. There are other factors, so many other factors. The media, for example, civil society, the generality of the people, the political issues, the big political issues of the time, and what positions governments take and opposition take and all of that do affect public opinion. And as it is today, early days yet, but I think we can decipher snipers of what seems to be happening and what probably we can forecast.
There's a view that MPP in opposition has started too early in terms of raising many issues. And this is a view. It's not my view necessarily, but there's a view that the leader of the minority is trying too hard. So for every major policy, even when the appointees were not coming, he was like, they are delaying, they should appoint. Then he says, appoint from this region. Then he now talks about different levels of appointments. It's almost like the MPP is struggling to find something to criticize the government in their so-called honeymoon stage. You are in Parliament. Do you get that sense that you need to probably pace yourself better, observe better what Mahama is trying to do before you can offer substantive opposition?
I will look at it a bit differently. Bernard, we need to ask ourselves, what is the role of the opposition in a democracy such as ours? The role of the opposition, essentially, first, is to keep the government accountable. I think it's absolutely important, which is why it is said that you cannot have a proper functioning democracy if there is a non-existent opposition, which is why our constitution expressly outlaws a one-party state. And that is a reaction to our history, where we had a one-party state. Which is the framers of our constitution felt that to have a one-party state will mean we do not have a true and functioning democracy. And so that is the first role of an opposition party. The second, and keeping the government accountable, is not the sole preserve or responsibility of the opposition. It is also the responsibility of people like yourself,
course, media,
civil society, and the rest. And so that is the role of opposition. The second is the opposition is required to offer constructive criticism. And I use the word constructive with emphasis, constructive criticism. And thirdly, the opposition is required to put itself in a position where it becomes a viable government in waiting. So these are the three cardinal pillars of any opposition worth its salt. And so if you are in Parliament and a matter is brought to the floor of Parliament, a policy of the government is brought to the floor of Parliament, or there's an issue in the country which is topical and which is relevant, and the opposition raises issues about it, in so doing, to satisfy these three cardinal requirements or responsibilities of an opposition which is worth its salt, a worthy opposition. I'm not too sure whether that can be said to be trying too hard or being desperate or being eager or not giving the government time. Of course, there's always the issue of style and how people present their issues and how they approach issues when they come up. But fundamentally, once the outreach of the opposition satisfies these three cardinal ingredients of an opposition party, of one, holding the government accountable, of two, offering constructive criticism, which in some cases the government may even find useful, and three, positioning itself through propositions of viable alternatives to policy and the rest as a worthy, credible, viable government in waiting, the opposition is doing its work.
Personally, on yourself, I've heard you comment on a number of things. I think one of the main things you did was to talk about the appointees. Because the president has said he would run the country with 60 ministers. He has 56. And then I think you had said that there are other people who have been appointed who are not non-ministers. the Minister for Government Communication came to deny that. I'm not sure where that issue is, because he said Mahama had appointed only 30 presidential staffers. I think at the time you said 100, if I'm not mistaken. Did you provide evidence of the 100?
Well, first of all, it is important for me to set out what I sought to do on the floor of Parliament. What I sought to do was to say that this age-old discourse or debate in Ghana, in our country, about size of government, and always remember that this debate of the size of government did not begin under President Akufo-Addo. I recall very vividly under President Kufuor and several other governments, the issue as to what should be the true size of the Ghanaian government has always been a big issue. And the comparison is always made as to the size of Ghana, the population of Ghana, and the population of Britain, for example, and the number of ministers they have, and the number of ministers we have here. So what I said was, if you want to appreciate the size of a government, and when people talk about the size of government, they essentially are talking about cost-saving measures. They are talking about a lean, efficient government which does not cost the taxpayer in a manner which is unbearable or which is unreasonable. That is essentially the quarrel. You have a government which is too big, they are running a government machinery with land cruisers, with salaries, with that. It's an unnecessary burden on the national exchequer.
Okay.
So I said, you will not appreciate the size of a government when you look at the number of ministers simpliciter. And that is the truth. Because you have other appointments, which other appointments enjoy conditions of service and privileges which are coterminous to what ministers enjoy. And I gave the example of, say, a senior presidential advisor whose pegging or ranking is the same as an MP cabinet minister. And so if you are talking about an MP cabinet minister as it relates to the cost on the national exchequer, a senior presidential advisor is just the same as, the only difference is the title. The only difference is the name. But otherwise, its incidents or incidences on the national exchequer are the same. You know, and that's the point I sought to make. So when you go to a place like United Kingdom, we normally talk about the size of the UK government only in terms of Secretary of State. Secretary of State. Yeah. But you know, Bernard, that in the United Kingdom, you have Secretary of State, you have Ministers of State, you have parliamentary private secretaries who are essentially deputy ministers. And when you put it all together, the size of the UK government is not what is normally presented to us. And so
Be that as it may, did you say that the president had appointed over 100 staffers at the presidency?
No, I did not.
You did not say that?
I said if you add the number of staffers, senior presidential advisors, and the rest, and you add them to
the ministers,
you'll be inching to 100. And
oh, that was what you said?
Yeah, that's the point I was making.
So if you add the 30 or so that we have seen to the 56, plus a couple others, I think maybe it was misunderstood because the minister's reaction was that there are only 27 as of the time he was reacting on March 7, and that he didn't know where he got the 100 from.
No, but when you add 27 to 56, as you say,
yes,
you are talking about
you're
talking about 83 ministers. You know, and indeed,
it's not just 83 ministers, 83 appointees.
So 83 appointees who draw the same salary and what have you. But
the man promised he would do below 60.
No, I don't. And he did 60. And then you have presidential staffers for the 16 regions and all of that. No, you see, but the point I'm making is this.
Yeah.
President Mohammed's appointment of 56 ministers is to be welcomed. There's no two ways about that. It's a good step.
It's commendable.
It's commendable. There's absolutely no two ways about that. Provided always that the 56 ministers are able to deliver.
Correct.
Because it is not just about the number of ministers or the size of the government.
Okay.
The national constitution is very clear that the president, the constitution is framed in this term that the president shall appoint as many ministers as are necessary for the running of the country. So if you have 56 ministers and they deliver, which is lean but effective, that is highly commendable. There's absolutely no two ways about that. But I also think it's important that in the discourse, in terms of enriching the discourse, we enlighten the discussion to let people know that it's not just the number of ministers.
It's good you've clarified
but
here.
all of it.
This is the point of view. My guest is the MP for Damongo, is Samuel Jinapor. When we come back, we'll talk about Galamsey. It's a big issue because he was Minister for Lands, and that was in the second Akufo-Addo term. There was a major national outcry for a clampdown on Galamsey when he was minister. Now that he is in opposition, how does he assess this government's fight against the canker? Stay with us.